police, there was a considerable delay before it was ultimately reported to the police. And you've explained,
that's correct.
You've explained the problem with the delay. Were there other difficulties that arose because of the manner in which the matter was handled internally to the church?
To my thinking, the only other major problem was in relation to the admissibility of the accused's statements. I think that there were the other problem that I didn't focus on as much because it didn't necessarily impact directly on the prosecution of the matter, but I acknowledge it, is that the way the complaints were handled internally by the church must have had a terrible impact on the complainant, and it led her complaints to be exposed to a very wide variety of people, more so than you would normally see in a sexual abuse case, where a young victim would speak to maybe one other person perhaps, and then the matter would end up in the hands of the police. In this particular case, the complainant was forced to go before at least 3 other members of the church. I think her mother was present, her father was there. I'm not sure whether any other persons were there. That was only on the first occasion. On the second occasion, it was even a bigger panel. And these are at least on the first occasion, people who live in her local community. So undoubtedly she was subject to some gossip and innuendo that might have resulted from the revelation of those matters.
And whether in this case or more generally, do you conceive of there being potentially a difficulty with regard to the contamination of evidence?
Yes, that's true. Probably not as important in this case because of the age of the complainant and the relevant consistency of her statements over the years. I wouldn't have anticipated that as being specifically necessarily a problem in this case, but potentially in other cases, yes. It's true to say that the fewer people who discuss the matters directly with the complainant, the better, at least until it's in the hands of the police where they conduct a proper interview process with non-leading questions.
Now, I don't wish to put you on the spot on a legal question, Mr. Davies, but you may be aware that in New South Wales and Victoria there are statutory offences for the concealment of certain types of offences. But I understand that there's no such statutory offence in Queensland. Would that be right?
I understand that the relevant law, which would have been misprision of felony, ceased to be in operation in Queensland many years before I became a prosecutor. I think, from memory, possibly in the 80s.
1985, my research tells me, Mr. Davies.
There you go. That was only an educated guess on my part. But that really meant that you didn't have the same, I suppose, prosecutorial influence over people in terms of them reporting offences. So technically I don't think that the elders in this case committed any offence at the time by simply failing to report the matter. And, in Queensland there still isn't a general offence of failing to report these type of matters, except in limited circumstances where you might be a mandated reporter in a particular professional occupation, such as teachers, doctors, police officers, child safety officers, etc. I've done a lot of work on that type of stuff in my capacity as a lawyer for the Education Department.
Mr. Davies, do you know the motivation for legislating to do away with the misprision law?
Look, no, I don't. The only reason I know about it at all is because I've had to do research on the issue in terms of my current employment to see what the laws were and how they affected departmental staff. And I had access, I think, to an Australian Law Reform Commission report that had some background research. And all I needed to know was it didn't exist anymore and there wasn't anything else to replace it.
Tell me, you may not know the answer to this off the top of your head, but is a Sunday school teacher a mandatory reporter under your legislation, or would they be? Very
unlikely, because it would only apply if they were a registered teacher.
They've got to be registered.
You have to be a registered teacher.
Right.
Part of that, I mean, I don't wish to say I'm an expert on the matter at all, but that was a limitation that was imposed in the adoption of the Carmody report that occurred in Queensland a couple of years ago into child protection, and there a lot of thinking was done about how you would define specifically the people that were going to be caught. And I was part of the discussions, I'll admit, and I think identifying people as registered teachers was just the simplest way.
Right. And I take it clergy weren't included?
I don't know. I don't think so.
No, that'll run you into other problems, yeah.
And you must understand that the mandatory reporting provisions in Queensland relate to child harm, so it's a much broader spectrum of matters than simply sexual abuse. If you look at the Education General Provisions Act, for example, in Queensland, which I have a lot to do with, you will see that there is a specific reporting provision, mandatory reporting provision, on school staff in relation to any sexual abuse. And that was amended only a couple of years ago in respect of a report authored by Dr. Ben Matthews from the Queensland Griffith University, I think, or QUT. I think you'll forgive me, I think it's QUT, where he had examined the nature of the mandatory reporting provisions in Queensland, and we changed them. It used to be you only had to report the sexual abuse committed by another teacher. Now it's broader.
So if it's happening in the home, it has to be reported if the teacher knows about it?
In the course of their duties, yes. Right. But there is no criminal offence related to the non-reporting in the Child Protection Act area. It's not an offence. The only comeback, I suppose, you have against a person who's a mandatory reporter who doesn't report is really an administrative one, such as discipline.
So it's not an offence not to report?
Not under the Child Protection Act, no. There's an obligation, but it's not an offence. Unless I haven't explored the question of whether there's a provision in the Queensland Criminal Code that applies in relation to people who have a duty to do something, and if they fail to do it, there's a default term of imprisonment that applies. So I don't recall specifically whether or not that has been ameliorated in terms of that particular obligation.
It's odd to have an obligation without a sanction, but...
Well, I think as I said, I'm not speaking on behalf of the State of Queensland in relation to this, but I would say that the thinking there really was because the Carmody report was trying to triage the number of reports that were coming into the child safety system. About 80% of matters reported were not acted on. They didn't reach the thresholds necessary for child protection statutory action, and they were effectively clogging up the system and wasting time and taking resources away from what considered the core concerns, really the sexual abuse and severe other abuse matters. So I think the thinking probably was that if we make it an offence provision, that's going to encourage people to report everything, rather than give effect to the policy aim of the reforms, which was to only get the most important stuff reported.
Well, you could do that by making it an offence provision in relation to the important matters, couldn't you?
Perhaps, yes.
Yeah. Yes, Mr. Stewart.
Mr. Davies, in your role in the prosecution service, did you have any involvement in other cases where there was some Jehovah's Witness element to it, relevant element?
Not that I recall.
Those are my questions, Your Honour.
Does anyone else have questions of Mr. Davies?
Yes, Your Honour.
Anyone else? No. No. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Coyne. I represent Dino Ali, Kevin Bowditch, Ron DeRoy, and others in these proceedings. Mr.
I
Davies,
think you need to just identify they're elders of the Jehovah's Witness Church.
who are each elders in the Jehovah's Witness Church. Mr. Davies, you made a statement on the 8th of July 2015. Correct?
Yes.
That statement was about your dealings with members of the Jehovah's Witness Church as part of the prosecution of someone. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. In that, did that include Mr. Dino Ali? Did you deal with him?
I don't recall specifically. I did have access to the committal transcript.
Yes.
But I didn't check it specifically. I do recall that I led evidence from the elders, at least in relation to the first appeal matter, but I can't recall specifically who they were.
Do you recall which elders made statements in relation to this matter?
I recognise the names DeRoy, Ali, Bowditch. Those are the ones that stick in my memory.
Yes. As elders who made statements in relation to the prosecution.
That's correct.
Yes. You say in your statement that you did not have any difficulty in obtaining cooperation from witnesses I examined who were in the main lay representatives of Jehovah's Witness Church, correct?
Correct.
Would that include those 3 persons that I've named?
Yes.
Yes. You've said, I do not recall any reluctance or hesitation to assist me in obtaining records in question in relation to the proceedings.
Yes.
Yes. And you've also said, I do not recall feeling that they had been uncooperative or mendacious in any respect.
Yes.
And that's referring to the witnesses again?
That's correct.
And that would be the 3 named people before, Ali, DeRoy and Bowditch.
That would be inclusive of them. I don't recall any problem with any of the witnesses, really, in the matter that I dealt with.
And you requested statements for the prosecution, which they made?
Well, I didn't request them. They would have been prepared and obtained by the police.
Yes.
They would have been part of the prosecution brief before I ever obtained the matter. But I may have spoken to them on the phone before the hearing. If, for example, the matter was going to be full evidence,
yes,
that's just my memory of it, I might have wanted to speak to them and take them through their evidence beforehand, effectively, conferencing them, and then I would have led their evidence in court. But that's probably the only contact I would have had with those particular witnesses.
Yes. If you had to characterise their statements from a prosecution standpoint, would it be correct to say that they were corroborative of the complaint?
I think so.
Would you also say that they contained alleged admissions of the accused?
I think if they didn't specifically contain them, they certainly referred to them.
Yes.
Because I think from memory, there were admissions outlined in other documents that we obtained directly from the Watchtower Society, I think, from memory.
Yeah.
And there was a solicitor I spoke to, and I had to organise a subpoena for documents.
Yes. So each of those statements of DeRoy, Bowditch, Ali, were all in support of the prosecution of the accused.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, no other questions? Mr. Stewart?
Nothing further, Your Honour. For Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Thank you. That concludes your evidence and you're formally excused.
Thank you.
Might I also be excused, Your Honour?
Oh, yes, certainly. I'm sorry, Mr. McMillan.
The witness whom I would call next ordinarily will take some time, and given that we've committed to have the expert witness of the Watchtower Society on Friday, it means that witness's evidence would hang over at least tomorrow and part of
Well, I think
Friday
we're travelling well in accordance with their schedule, so we're not troubled by adjourning now, if that's what you're asking.
Well, that is what I'm suggesting.
Okay, all right. We'll adjourn until 10 o'clock in the morning?
Friday.
Oh, sorry, 10 o'clock Friday morning. Yeah.
Also,
Yeah, Dr. Jason Morrison, theologist again. I just want to say thank you for watching the videos, and I hope you got plenty of self-rediscovery and freedom out of it. If you watched it on YouTube, please share or like, maybe even comment. If you watched it on Facebook, like, comment, share. But most of all, get out and live. This isn't a rehearsal. You've got a one-off life. Don't let your loyalty and your faithfulness blind you to the life that you should be experiencing. Till the next video, thank you for watching, and bye for now.